Welcome to Syntax. Today we have Søren Bramer Schmidt on. He is the co-creator of Prisma, and we're going to be talking about all kinds of exciting stuff. First of all, Prisma going local first, being able to run Prisma in the browser and a sync engine coming up. We talked to him about like biggest mistakes on writing SQL queries and just database mistakes in general for JavaScript idiots like us. We asked him what's the deal with GraphQL and is GraphQL even used anymore? Where is it popular? They have a new thing called type SQL coming out, or it's already out, and that will give you full type safety on writing raw SQL queries. And then finally, I asked him a whole bunch of questions about like best practices on running database queries and doing database stuff when you're on serverless. You're all over the world, but your database lives somewhere. What's the big deal? Let's get into it. Søren, thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks, Wes and Scott. Good to meet you. I'm really happy to be here and excited to dive into some of these things.
Yeah, likewise. Yeah, we've been using Prisma for a long time since we launched the Syntax site, and Wes and I have been using it before that. I think we've been down with Prisma back in the GraphQL days.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We were just talking about that, how Scott and I think we've gone through every iteration of Prisma back to when it was a GraphQL hosted thing called GraphQL. So it's been many years. What was it like? How many years have you been at it?
It's been a wild ride you've been on with us.
Yeah.
Thank you for sticking with us for so long. I'm curious, how did you end up adopting Prisma in the first place? What was that like? What were you evaluating, and how did you end up picking Prisma?
I have a course called Advanced React and GraphQL, and the initial offering of that, I was just kind of looking into different GraphQL implementations, you know, how they work with different things. And at the time, Prisma was just a GraphQL first. It's since moved, for anyone listening, it's since moved to being just a very good fully typed JavaScript ORM for various databases. Is that a fair thing to say?
That is accurate. There's no GraphQL left in Prisma. We're heavily inspired by GraphQL and my background in the C# world using LINQ. But GraphQL has heavily inspired the syntax for Prisma, and I think for the better.
Maybe that's a good first question. Is GraphQL had massive popularity for a couple of years, and now we're starting to see a lot of people say, maybe we should just query the data we need directly on the server, maybe even render it on the server. You don't need a GraphQL API. But then we have a lot of people on from like corporate world, and they say GraphQL is a savior for us because it's a nice layer to interact with all of our 11 different APIs. So what's your thoughts on where the whole GraphQL world is right now?
So GraphQL is a bit of heavy machinery, and everybody in that world, they did GraphQL-like stuff before there was GraphQL. They just did it in their own ways. So the innovation GraphQL brought is, let's standardize on a way to do this, on a way to do pagination, on a way to reference other types. And then we can build and share tooling. So from that perspective, GraphQL was a huge step up. Many people were using OAuth in the Microsoft world or other things outside, but really people were just doing REST APIs, and they had all of these conventions about how to do all of these things you need to do. So what GraphQL brought was standardization and a massive improvement in tooling, in productivity. And I still love GraphQL for that. But for many things, it's very heavyweight. You don't need all of the overhead of the type system, generating the types, generating the client, all of that stuff. It's just too much.
Even to get into your initial question a little bit, back to that, was you were asking a little bit of like why we chose Prisma. And, at the time, I think I came from Mongo. I know Wes had done a fair amount of Mongo. And so migrations and things like that weren't my favorite. So I personally was looking for a tool that, one, made those types of things easy, but also, the studio component, the ability to inspect our data in an easy way. For me, it was like a nice onboarding into SQL-based databases that, I didn't really have the experience with. And also, believe it or not, Sentry has a Prisma integration. So we use Sentry's Prisma integration for our tracing. And also, we actually, this will be just a quick ad read into Sentry, but we use Sentry and Prisma together to find our slow queries, which is a really cool thing. Sentry has the ability to tell you which of your queries are slow in your database, and that allowed us to do things like add indexes where we didn't have them, or just in general, take care of our database in a way.
Can we tell that story real quick? Is we had launched a syntax website for maybe 6 months, and we had something in our Sentry pop up that it was like, oh, this is a slow query, and I was like, that's weird. Like, why would like finding a show based on its number be a slow query? And it turns out that we had forgot to put an index on that field. So what it was doing is essentially just querying every single show, looping through them, and then giving us the actual show for it, which is hilarious. And then I went back into the Prisma schema to add the index, and I had the Prisma linter turned on, and the Prisma linter told me that I needed to put an index on it. And I was like, oh, I missed it.
It's pro stuff. I mean, that happens all the time. Indexes are just one of those things you can miss. I mean, that's something you should always be thinking about, but you can always miss them. How you're querying your database changes over time and stuff. Either way, head over to sentry.io/syntax. Sign up and get 2 months for free. All right, back to the show.
That's such a common story. And just the other day, I was talking to somebody from a major US retailer who has built the web shop, the infrastructure with Prisma. And he was relaying to me how they had this problem that whenever traffic spiked, there was a high chance that the entire site would crash. And they were doing all of this work with their Kubernetes clusters and scaling and this and that. And what was the problem? A missing index on the sessions table.
Yeah. Classic.
Oh, do you see any other like common things happen like that? Because what I foresee is a bunch of us JavaScript idiots grab an ORM off the shelf, knowing
we call them node
about,
hipsters. Very prolific.
Yes. Like knowing nothing about how databases work, and we just start building startups and whatnot, and you can do silly stuff like forget an index. Is there any other like common stuff you see over and over again where people that are not necessarily database experts?
The other thing that happens all the time, and it's really the major problem with most ORMs, we make it too easy to create crazy queries that are difficult for the database to optimize. Specifically, when you do joins, you traverse relations, and you filter on the related data, that can become really expensive and really difficult to optimize with an index. And it's so tempting to do because you just like bap, and you have all of the data you need, which is awesome. But what you don't think about is all the work that has to happen on the database to load up that data.
Yeah, that was also a problem with GraphQL for me is, you can get anything you want? Sure. Let me go 40 levels deep and grab everything I want, Who liked it? Give me their profile photos, but who liked theirs? Give me their profile. And then before you know it, there's actually database queries happening under the hood here.
Yeah, and you can only really do that if you aggressively cache the results. But then you need to worry about that too, right? Now you have stale data, and when do you rephrase that cache? And it actually gets really, really complicated.
Yeah, getting into data loader and then all that fun stuff. That is like the GraphQL iceberg is like on the surface it's so great, and under the surface
this might be the one GraphQL influence that is still present in the Prisma client. We have built in the data loader pattern, so that means if you do the GraphQL thing where you're traversing in layers, and on a deeper layer you do a lot of the same queries, we will automatically batch all of those up according to the data loader pattern.
Yeah. One thing I'm really thankful about with Prisma is that after you guys, pivoted a couple of times, using Prisma has been extremely stable. Like, I feel like it's one of the libraries we can update with and never have to worry about, anything like even having to adjust our code base too much. Is that something you guys really think about deeply when making big changes?
Big time. And I'm glad that you're noticing this. One of the things we've really had to work on over the last year and a half is this perception that Prisma is moving really slow. We have 3,000 open GitHub issues, lots of feature requests, lots of cool things and functionality that people want. But what happens as you mature as a product, you go from appealing to early adopters that just want new shiny stuff all the time to having to serve a much more mature audience. And I think the two of you are in that category. You are experienced software developers, you work at Sentry. You want stuff to work. You want to be able to upgrade without having to spend half a day fixing stuff.
Yeah.
And that's really what most of our users are telling us. It's what we call the silent majority. They're not so vocal online on Twitter, but they are there, and they are the majority of our user base. That's what they want. They want us to move slow, to never break things, to make it a little bit better all the time. And that's what we've been focused on for the last 3 years since we kind of matured into that category. But it does mean that we are a little bit slower to release new features, new fancy things. And the small group of people that are very vocal online, we hear from them, and we like to hear from them. But we have to serve that other audience too.
All right, well, we'll make sure to ask you about the Drizzle kids on Twitter. I'm sure they get under your skin a little. But let's talk about that. Is one thing that you're starting to hear from people is, I don't need a database ORM. I'm going to simply write SQL strings straight up, And then people are like, well, what about types and what about TypeScript? So one thing that Prisma has just rolled out is typed queries or typed SQL.
Typed SQL, typed SQL.
How do you say it?
Typed SQL is what we say internally.
Oh, so tell us about that.
That's right. So when you think about building an abstraction on top of database queries, you can really go two directions. You can either build an ORM that looks more like what Prisma is, or you can build a query builder that looks more like Keesley or Drizzle. And based on our background and how we wanted to, like the design sensibilities we had when we started Prisma, we went with the Prisma model. We want something that is extremely easy to use, no foot guns, and it works great for the majority of use cases. We think about the 90% of CRUD-style queries in your application. I think the Prisma API is ideal for those cases. But then people will tell you that it lacks flexibility, and that's true. There's lots of queries that you just cannot express with the Prisma API. So what we hear from a lot of those young Drizzle people online is that they want full flexibility. They tell us, we have to rip out Prisma in order to migrate to Drizzle so we can have the flexibility. And that's great. If you want to do the query builder thing, do that. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But I think for most people, especially people in more mature organizations, you want a simple API that is very easy to do code review on. You can see what's going on. And that's the Prisma API. And then for those 5 or 10% of the queries where you need to have more flexibility, maybe you need to optimize performance, you should just drop down to a lower level. And that means whenever you are at that lower level, you know to pay attention during code review. You know that something special is going on. And for a long time, we've had what we call raw queries. Just write a SQL query and send it to Prisma, and we'll execute it as a SQL query. But the developer experience of that is not great. There's no real tooling, no auto-completion, no type safety, no nothing. So what we've done with type SQL is we like that distinction between the super high-level Prisma API and then the lower level that allows you to do anything. But we want to provide a better developer experience. So what type SQL does is it enables you to write SQL queries in a .SQL file. And that means you can have a more native experience. You get auto-completion based on your schema. And then on top of that, we're providing type generation. So that means you write your SQL query with full auto-completion provided by your IDE. And then the Prisma generation step generates input and output types. So that means in your application where you're executing this query, you now have the same level of type safety that you get from normal Prisma queries. And we think that is a delightful experience.
Yeah, that's great. So to be clear, it's not like types or autocomplete for actually writing the SQL strings. It's for when the SQL runs and returns the data, that data will be fully typed, correct?
That's correct. But if you have a modern IDE, like VS Code or something like this, they have extensions that you can use to connect to your database, and then you actually get the autocomplete experience as you're writing your SQL query.
Oh,
really?
That's cool. That is not something I've done. Sorry, go ahead, Scott.
No, I was just gonna say, I did not necessarily know that existed. Do you have any off the top of your head that you know? Are there just generalized? Just look for MySQL or
Just search for your database in the extension Explorer. They're all kind of terrible. They mostly work, but they're not great. So what we're probably going to do at some point is integrate that experience into the VS Code, the Prisma VS Code extension, and see if we can do a better experience. I think we can. But for now, we're just telling people to use those tools that already exist.
And what are some instances where someone would duck out to writing SQL strings directly instead of using the ORM?
So really, the Prisma ORM syntax is very limited. It's great for loading some data, for updating a model, writing a new model. But as soon as you need to do something you could think of as more analytical queries, or really just you need more flexibility than what the Prisma API provides, then you need to dip down to raw SQL queries. It could be as simple as saying you want to compare two columns in the same row. The Prisma API currently doesn't support that. Or if you want to do complex aggregate queries, we don't have great support for that. You can do that with SQL.
Yeah. So for anyone listening, it's very common for someone to say, "Oh, okay, I want to run a bunch of aggregate data on. I want to see how many people from California did these sales, but only when they had bought this item." And it's very expensive to, or sometimes impossible to query all of that data, bring it into your programming language like JavaScript, loop over it, and then have the data. Like I've run into that situation many times in MongoDB, where I had like a 40-second query when I was running stats on 10 years worth of data. And the solution to that is your database is very fast at doing that type of stuff. So you have to switch languages from JavaScript loops into your actual database language, and then they can run them much faster. Is that a good way to explain that?
That's exactly right. And if you're not super experienced with writing SQL queries, you can just copy your Prisma schema into one of those AI things and have it write complex SQL for you. That works remarkably well.
Just make sure you review it first. Yeah. Drop tables.
That'll probably be fine. Just run it against production.
Totally. Yeah.
Oh, so that's now fully available in the latest version of Prisma?
It is. It's called Type SQL. It's in the latest version of Prisma. You just go and use it. And as I said, there are some things we want to improve, like the integrated auto-completion experience as you're writing your SQL queries. We also currently require you to provide access to a database. Ideally a local database, not your production database. And that's because we are asking the database about type information when we're generating those types. In a future version, we might find a way to take all of that logic and build it into Prisma instead.
Okay, so is there, basically you take the query that the person wants to run, and is there like an explain command or something like that?
It's similar. So we are generating a prepared statement, and most databases are able to return type information based on a prepared statement and the actual database schema. So that's the functionality we're using.
Okay.
Nice.
And which databases does this work with?
So it works with Postgres, MySQL, and SQLite. SQLite is a little different. We've actually had to take parts of the SQLite query generator and embed into Prisma because it doesn't have this functionality of creating a prepared statement and returning type information to you. So we had to lift that out of SQLite and embed it directly into Prisma.
Nice. So we lean on, like Wes mentioned, the linter, which I think is a really fantastic tool for making sure our schema is correct. But what do you think are the most common mistakes people make when authoring their schemas?
So we actually have a new tool that is going to help you with these kind of common errors. Just a few months ago, we released a tool we call Optimize. And it relies on that same tracing information you were talking about before, Scott. And it's super cool that you're passing that into Sentry and getting live information about slow queries. But for anybody out there who's not using Sentry, you can go and take a look at Optimize.
Who's not using Sentry?
They do exist, I've heard. So Optimize is a purpose-built tool just for Prisma, relying on that same tracing information. You just enable it in your local development environment. So when you're running your tests or just clicking around, trying your website, then it collects information from all of these, from all the queries you're generating. It will show it to you in a nice UI overview, but then it will also detect patterns of common mistakes and provide recommendations for how to address them. The missing index one is an obvious one. We have a few recommendations, and over time, as we learn from the community, what are the common mistakes, what is most useful, we'll build out this library of recommendations. So I think that's going to be a very useful tool.
Let's talk about serverless. So one thing that I ran into with the Syntax website was when I was doing my transcripts. The way that our transcripts work is we get the entire transcript for the audio, and what is returned from that is, like, you have a whole transcript, and then each individual sentence has, like, we call them an utterance, right? So one transcript has many utterances, and then every single utterance will also have individual words, and every single word has like a time marking of when it starts and stops. So quite a bit of data for like a 1 hour podcast. And I built the whole thing out, worked great. And then I deploy the thing to Vercel, and we start hitting issues with it because the payload of those types of thing was just too large, because I was trying to do it in a single linked, what's the word for it? Linked query, batch query. Basically, I wanted to create the transcript and the utterances and the words for those utterances in one single...
One transaction. Yeah.
Yeah, one transaction. Thank you. And I was hitting issues with that because it was simply too large. I don't know if it was timing out or whatnot. So I ended up having to chunk it up and do it one by one, so I wouldn't hit those issues. But that's a limitation of serverless, where you can't run code for that long in serverless.
Yeah.
So curious about your thoughts on how to approach something like that.
So it's a real challenge for us because we have hundreds of thousands of developers doing all kinds of weird things with Prisma, and they are running Prisma in all kinds of weird environments.
Yeah.
And the world of serverless has presented a lot of weird environments. So you mentioned Vercel. Vercel is a really great platform, super easy to use. But it also comes with a set of standard configurations that you then need to fit yourself into. And one of the things about serverless is that it's a very constrained environment, right? For every single request, you get your own environment to run in. So there's less variance, which is great. But it also means for reasons of economics, that environment is very constrained. And it sounds like a problem you might have been running into is that the memory available on that instance is very constrained. Now, if you use Lambda and maybe even on Vercel, you can go and change that. You can change what is the environment available for this serverless function, how much CPU is available, how much memory is available.
Yeah.
And you can change that for different endpoints of your application, right? You can say your general website, it just needs a small environment. That's fine. It doesn't do a lot of work. But then you have these background type jobs that needs lots of memory.
Yeah.
You can go and tweak that. And maybe that is what you're running into.
Yeah. I think that was it. It was a bit odd because I literally just took the transaction and looped over it and did each one at a time. The downside to that is if it fails somewhere in between, I don't get the nice ability to roll back the entire thing.
You need to manually clean it up, right? And then try again.
Exactly. But not a big deal for us at the end of the day. Another question I have about serverless is everyone talks, serverless or even like Edge, run it as close to the user as possible. And then everyone says, well, if you need to connect to your database, you're kind of ruining the benefits of that. Is that true?
Latency is just the killer of performance, right? So whenever you go from one machine to another, that's bad, especially if you go back and forth many times. You want that latency to be as short as possible. So typically between your application server and your database, you can have many round trips to serve a single user request. So you want your application and your database to be as close as possible. You want them to be in the same AWS region as a minimum. Maybe if you can have them in the same availability zone, that would be great. What you want to avoid at all costs is to have your application server in South Africa and your database in US East. That's really, really bad. 300 milliseconds is okay, but if you do it 4 times, it's not okay.
Yeah.
So that's the problem people are running into when they are deploying at the edge. It's really, there are other problems, but this is the primary one. This is the one that confuses people. So if you are in the Cloudflare ecosystem, they are doing this thing they call smart placements, where they're trying to detect that you have these round trips back and forth. And then they say, even though the user is in South Africa, we're going to not use a node in South Africa. We're going to use one in US East because that's where the database is. It's going to be faster. But you have to think about those things.
Yeah, totally. We had them on and asked them the same question. They're like, we will try to, against what you think, move where your application is running and try and move it as close to the database. And they also have this product called Hyperdrive. It's not something I've checked out, but essentially just a fat pipe behind the scene that goes directly to your database.
Hyperdrive is very similar to Accelerate from Prisma. So we built Accelerate initially because Prisma users came to us 3-4 years ago and said, we're trying to use RDS serverless and the data API. We want to use that because it optimizes performance from serverless functions. But this data API thing from AWS, it really doesn't work. And it still doesn't work. It's a terrible product. So we built Accelerate to be a proxy in between your application server and your database. And one additional benefit you get from Accelerate is that we place the Prisma query engine right next to your database. So that means those round trips, multiple round trips, they now happen close to your database, even if your application server is somewhere else. It could be because you're using Cloudflare, some other edge environment to have the application server run close to the user. It could just be because you have misconfigured your things and the server is in US West and the database is in US East. Either way, Accelerate will help you with that problem.
Okay. And it also does connection pooling as well, right? Because another problem that you have with serverless is you run like one function, it connects to your database, right? But if you get a spike in traffic, you could be running 100 serverless functions at once, and you can't create 100 connections to your database, right? What's the solution?
That's correct. Well, you can create 100 connections. You can create many connections, especially with MySQL. MySQL doesn't really mind connections. Postgres is a little bit more expensive because it needs a full process for each connection. But if you have a beefy server, you can still have thousands of connections. The bigger issue actually is that establishing that connection, especially over a high latency network, is really slow because there's a SSL handshake and everything going on. So you want to have a pre-established connection that you can reuse.
Oh.
And
so that's the benefit. Sorry, go ahead. I didn't realize that. Okay.
That's the primary benefit. And when people talk about cold starts in serverless, part of it is your application server has to start up. But the other part is you need to establish those TCP connections, do the SSL handshake, and get the database connection running. It just takes a long time. It takes on the order of half a second. And if you're able to reuse those connections, then you can make that a lot faster. So that's the benefit of using something like Accelerate or PT Bouncer, where you can have those connections already established in something that is more long running, a traditional server. Yeah. And then you can establish fast connections to that proxy from your serverless functions.
If you're probably using, I think AWS charges based on like wall time. So like a half second every single serverless function, that's going to get expensive real quick, isn't it?
That's right. It adds up.
Oh, man. Because Cloudflare Workers doesn't wait on I.O. So if you make like a fetch request to your database or something like that, then it will...
Are you all using Cloudflare?
We're not using it on the Syntax website, but I'm pretty bullish on a lot of the Cloudflare stuff, given the limitations of it. But I'm a big fan of it.
As most good things, it started out as a bit of a toy a few years ago, but I really think that the Cloudflare has a real shot at becoming the next generation general purpose cloud platform. I think they are the one company that is on a path to dethrone AWS. It's going to be a long, long path. But if you look at all the technology they're building, it's impressive.
And why do you think that?
So you mentioned the wall time and the pricing model. With Cloudflare, you get the benefit of deploying to 300 regions whenever you deploy your application. On AWS, where you have 20-some regions, and by default, you deploy to one. When you have a Lambda function starting up, you get that slice of compute and you pay for it no matter what is going on, even if you're just sitting there waiting for external I.O. Cloudflare has a different model that is much more efficient. So one, you deploy to the entire world. That's a huge benefit, but also you pay much less money because they have a more efficient runtime.
Wow, that's good. I'm very excited about Cloudflare. Sorry, go ahead, Scott.
No, yeah. And Cloudflare is a really good, I would say, like onboarding into their products, where just simply to use Cloudflare CDN, right? They get you into that and then slowly upsell. But the upsells are all really small. Like, it's really easy for me to move all of my domains over there. That experience is great. I totally agree that their products seem to just, really be finding the right spot for me personally. One thing that I think goes along with this conversation about latency is local first. It's a topic that keeps coming up, right? Because what is faster latency-wise than just storing the data directly on your phone and syncing it behind the scenes? I watched one of your talks on, I believe it was Expo in Local First. I'm curious about like what Prisma's position is there, and like are those things coming to the web as well? What's going on there?
So we talked about this maturity journey you go on as a product, as a category establishes, and Local First is all the way out there. Like a year ago, it was all academics. It was very much this is not useful for anybody. But we are moving up that curve of maturity, and it is getting to a point where it's actually really interesting, and I think people should be looking at it. Local First the promise is that you can deliver much greater user experience. And if you look at products like Linear, like Figma, they're built this way. When you're working in Linear or the Figma document, it's all happening on your local device. And as a result, it's just a great experience. It's fast, it's snappy, it works, at least to some extent, offline, which is great. But I think what is underappreciated and what is going to make this model mainstream is that it is also a much better developer experience. If you listen to some of the tech talks from the folks at Linear, they talk about how they have this really complex piece of machinery called the sync engine, and they have some smart people working on that. They have, from the beginning of their company 7-8 years ago, they've invested in this thing. But that means all the rest of the developers in the company, they have a much simpler world to operate in. All the data is local. They can just bang out new features really quick. They don't have to think about distributed systems problems and caching and all this kind of stuff that we were talking about before. Those problems just do not exist. All the data exists locally, and you can program your features without expectation. That means you need to query the database many, many times. It's okay. It's right there. It doesn't cost anything. That is a real shift in how you think about building applications. There are lots of complications that come with this, lots of trade-offs, and that's what we as an industry, we need to kind of grapple with. We have thoughts on how this can work really, really well in a way that is not just for a few early adopters, but for the masses of developers, and that's what I was talking about at this App.js conference earlier this year.
Yeah, you know what? I think Prisma is really well positioned there. I know there's a handful of different services and new platforms popping up left and right. But a lot of times what they are is either they're just the sync engine, they're just the local side, or they're trying to be the whole picture, but they're having to create like the ORM from scratch. And it feels like you all have so much of the groundwork laid that like once you have the local story and the syncing, like everything else will just come together, which to me is an ideal scenario considering I like Prisma. I use Prisma all the time. If I could use Prisma to do my local first work instead of having to reach for replicache or any of these, kind of complex solutions, that would be an ideal scenario for me, for sure.
I agree. Replicache is really cool, and the new stuff they're working on even cooler. And
totally.
It has been part of the inspiration that has put us on the path that we are on. So just a second, we can talk about how we're thinking about the syncing problem and how we think that should work. But the first thing we did is we brought Prisma to the client. Prisma is an ORM. It works just on the server. So earlier this year, we released Prisma support for Expo and React Native. And I think the most critical thing that we did that we got right is we introduced what we call reactive queries. So on the server side, it's really very simple. You have a request coming in, you execute some queries, you return a result, and then all of the state, everything, you just blow it away. You don't care. New request comes in, fresh state. If applications work that way, whenever you click the button, the app would restart. It would be a terrible, terrible experience. So that's why front-end development is actually a lot more complex than back-end development. You have an application can run for minutes or hours, and you need to deal with all of that. That is what is complicating most UX work. With reactive queries, you can get rid of all of that state management. Instead, you can, in your components in React, you can just query the data you need. Then you can rely on the underlying mechanism to update the UI whenever any of the underlying data changes. So we released that earlier this year. It's been really popular. And I think it really simplifies how you're building applications.
Your state management essentially becomes your local database, and it's effortless to write to. We just built a desktop app with Tori where you have a SQL-like database that you're shipping, I guess we just use IndexedDB for that. And that's the best part. The state management was either saving or loading from that IndexedDB, and that's it. You always have that data. It's always persisting, and it's super duper fast.
Yeah, I built something with Dexy a couple of weeks ago.
Nice, cool.
Dexy is Scott went deep and tried every single local first everything and explained it to all of us. So my first sort of foray into this was using Dexy.js, which is an IndexedDB kind of a ORM, and they have React hooks where you can say use live query, where you simply just like
Nice.
query a list of whatever you want, and then anytime some other piece of the code updates that, the query updates and React updates. And I was like, man, this is great. And like in a lot of the cases, I didn't even need to think about like UIs for loading state or UIs
Right.
for
Yes.
Just comes for free, right?
Yeah.
yeah, or what do you call that when like you think it's gonna save properly?
Optimistic UI updates.
Optimistic UI. A lot of that is like, I'm not optimistic. I know it's just gonna take a millisecond to save. I don't need to be optimistic. Of course, there's still situations you probably want that, but man, it's so great. And so is that the plan with Prisma, is to eventually come to client-side JavaScript world with that type of thing?
So we think we have a good shot at becoming the tool that makes local first development mainstream.
Nice. That's very
It's a bit of a path to get there, and we started with React Native and Expo, partly because it was easier technically for us to implement support for React Native compared to browsers, but also because this was an ecosystem that was really eager for something better. Working with SQLite in React Native applications is a bit of a pain, and we just bring the Prisma DX to that experience. So what happens next is we're going to build support for Prisma in the browser. You might know, but Prisma uses a Rust query engine. So we've already done all the hard work to compile that to WebAssembly.
Oh.
We had to do that for Edge function support. So we're going to use that for Prisma support in the browser. And then we will bundle a WebAssembly version of SQLite that works out of the box. There is a key advancement that has happened in browsers. All the major browsers support this now, and that is I think it's called the Origin Private File System or something like that, OPFS. It's a really fast API to store files in the browser. IndexedDB is actually pretty slow. And now you don't have to rely on that anymore. You can store your SQLite file directly on the file system using this new API. So we're going to make use of that, and then we will have a unified API across React Native applications, browser applications, and of course you will continue to be able to use the Prisma API on your server.
Yeah.
So instead of
Very
using
exciting.
the database built into the browser, which is IndexedDB, you're
Yes.
literally just using the
Create your
file
own
system
database.
API.
Yeah.
You stick the file system, the SQLite file, into the browser, and then you use Prisma client side to read and write to that, and that's fast.
It is extremely fast, much faster
Wow.
than you would expect it to be. Of course, you need to download a megabyte or two of WASM stuff initially, and that's a bit annoying. But for the applications we're targeting, they're more like linear. They're more like apps, less like websites. So we think that's a decent trade-off.
Yeah, you load it once, and you have the tab open or the desktop app open for weeks sometimes.
Yeah,
right?
and this thing will just be cached forever. So even if you go away and come back, it'll be there.
Well,
Yeah,
that's exciting for that type of thing.
So working with a SQLite database locally in the browser or in your React Native application is great. But the next step becomes, well, how do you make sure that the data exists not just for you, one user on your device, but in a shared environment? So if you think of a product like Notion has pages, and the pages can be, they're in a workspace, of course, but then each page can be shared with one or more people, or they can be private. So what you really want from a local first experience as a developer is you want a way to define what pages, what data components should be loaded onto the device and which shouldn't. And you want to really make sure that data that should not be accessible to this one user never shows up on the device. And if you want to do this in a way where you really truly support offline capability, offline editing, it's pretty difficult because you can't just say, here's a query that includes some filtering for the user and then cache the result of that. That's not good enough. You need to take all of the data that is relevant for that user and move it locally. So we're going to build a sync engine that will be available open source. You'll be able to run this on your own server if you want to. But then, of course, we will also provide a cloud service that just does this for you, scales well, takes care of backups, and so on. The key opinionation that we're putting into this thing that I think is different from most other local first sync systems is we're going to make every kind of key piece of data in your application a separate SQLite database. So if you're thinking about Notion, Notion has pages. Every page in Notion would be its own SQLite database. And that makes sense because the the permission boundary in Notion is on the page level. You either have access to a page or you don't. And that means now the sync engine can know what pages, what databases you have access to, and just preload all of them. They'll all be available on your device as soon as you open up your app and you're ready to go.
Man, I'm doing so much of this by myself right now. So I'm stoked to hear all this. Yeah.
How does that work when you get a little bit more complicated in like authorization and access? You know, like I want to be able to see a list of items in the store, but I shouldn't be able to see who owns that item, or you know, like there's part of that data model that should be restricted, but part of it needs to be public.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think we'll see that there's going to be a hybrid model where some of those things really are like documents, like Notion, like Figma, even like Linear, and the permission model fits very well to the document model. And then there are other things like what you're talking about that are a little bit more like the arbitrary SQL queries we talked about before. They are at a different level. They're a little bit more complex. And I think we'll see that the documents, we can use that nice and easy sync engine I just talked about. And then these other more complex queries, they will need something else. So maybe you'll want those to always run on the server. Maybe that's the best trade-off for your app. Maybe you want to pre-compute those lists and put them in their own documents. And a sync engine like the one we're creating should make it easy for you to do that. But this really is something we all need to figure out as an industry.
Yeah.
We still don't really know. As an example, when we launched support for Expo earlier this year, we've now been using this internally, right? One of the things we found is that because we have reactive queries, we wanted to push all of the state into the database. Anything like where you are in the UI, what pop-up have open, and so on, all of that we wanted in the database because then we could make use of the reactive queries. But creating a database schema that supports all of it is actually a little bit annoying. It's a lot of stuff to manage. So now we're trying to figure out how to make that a more seamless experience. And this is going to be true for all of these new paradigms, these new approaches we need to invent. We need to see it first. We need to see what doesn't work so well, and then we need to find solutions to it.
David Capiano was just knocking at my door talking about state machines for exactly that type of thing. It's pretty wild that you could store like every single thing, even like down to what item are you hovering, and then your UI is a function of state, right?
Absolutely. State machines are great.
Let's ask real quick. We said we would ask about the Drizzle guys. They are constantly on Twitter being hilarious and sometimes a little bit mean. I'll say that. Internally, are you able to share what's the feelings towards them? I know they joked about even sending you a box of bees on Valentine's Day.
So look, I'm a little old school. I don't get all of these memes. The Drizzle meme game is like top of the line, and I cannot keep up. I just give up.
Have you ever had calls with those guys at all?
I listened to the syntax episode with the Drizzle team, and I think they even mentioned having a call with Nitin. I haven't personally had a call, but had some interactions on GitHub. I think they've been doing great work, right? People love the Drizzle query builder. If you look at the NPM downloads, they are about tied or maybe exceeding Easily, which is super cool. So great work. I don't understand the way they're communicating. That's okay. That's not yeah.
Can I ask you about like what database is your favorite? You know, like
we've
been seeing a lot of people kind of sour on MongoDB lately. Everybody's talking SQLite. They're going back to their old favorites, MySQL or Postgres.
Well, I'll share this. By far, the majority of the Prisma user base is using Postgres. Okay. It's more than 50% is just Postgres.
And do you know the split for the rest?
Then it's MySQL and Mongo. We support also a SQL Server. I think that is still higher than SQLite, and that's because our client support is so new, right? But Postgres is really such a huge market share. And if you look at industry trends, you'll see that too. SQL Server, Oracle, MySQL going down, Postgres going up. And I think what has happened is that Postgres is extremely flexible, and that's what people have loved it for so long. But it has been difficult to operate. If you talk to people who have operated Postgres at scale, they'll share all kinds of horror stories. Postgres has just improved. It's faster, almost comparable to MySQL. It is easier to operate, and this has happened over the last 5 years. So my prediction is that Postgres is just going to dominate. You asked about MongoDB, and I think MongoDB was popular for 2 reasons. One is the document model. Document model is extremely convenient. You can just have this very complex data structure. You can collocate it all in one place, so it's fast to load, but you still support indexes on that complex data. Well, the relational databases, they do that too now. They have excellent JSON support, including indexing. That's a thing that has happened in the last 5 years, very much driven by Mongo's early support. And then the other thing that really made Mongo popular was the operational and scaling characteristics. You could do replications, you could do sharding, you can have a really large data set. And what has happened in the last 5-10 years is that computers has just gotten really, really fast. In my last real job before starting Prisma, I was working at Trustpilot, and it's a large online review site. And we had this problem that we kept buying bigger and bigger database servers from Amazon until we had bought the biggest one, and we were like, oh no, now we're in trouble. So we moved to Mongo for that reason. It was a multi-year process to do that. But now the single machines you can get is something like 100 times faster than the big machines we were using back then. And that just means you don't really need to scale out the same way you did in the past. So Postgres can get you really, really far.
That's really funny because we've often joked about that. Like the solution to a lot of my problems were simply just buy a faster computer.
Yeah. Or wait a few years and then buy a faster computer.
Yeah. Wait a few years. But like why is that? Is that because of like processors are getting faster, memory is cheaper?
So we got SSDs. Yeah, that's a big thing.
That's
SSD
a big one.
Big, yeah.
Because the database has to live on a drive somewhere, right?
It used to be that you had to have your working set in memory, otherwise you're dead, because you could do like 10, 50 requests to the spinning disk per second. That's just not a lot when you're talking web servers. But now you have SSDs, NVMEs. They're extremely fast. You can tolerate having a large portion of your data not in memory. And at the same time, the memory capacity you have now is not 64 gigabytes, it's terabytes. So it's just you have a lot more of everything.
Man. And one thing we also hear a lot when we talk about SQLite and like Cloudflare and whatnot is like it's not guaranteed. What is it? Not guaranteed writes or guaranteed writes, but not guaranteed reads, where if you update one somewhere in one part of the country, somebody else making that read. Can you explain that problem? And is that actually a problem?
So that's the read your own rights problem. And in a distributed system, you often end up in the situation where you have replicas of your data in multiple regions so that you can serve reads really fast. But because of the way the database is structured, you can only do writes in one region. So whenever a write comes in, it is redirected to that central primary database. But then when you've done that write and you go and do a read immediately after, maybe reading the same data you just wrote, well, you get that from the replica and the data hasn't really trickled down there yet. So that's the read your own write problem. There are simple ways you can get around this in your application layer. A thing we did at Trustpilot all the time was we just cached that data for a little bit and used the cache. That works well. You can also set a little timer and say, for a little while, I'm going to go and read from the primary instead of the replica. And some database products, they have built-in support for this. I know that Kenzie Dotz, he's very fond of this setup where he uses SQLite on Fly.io. Yeah. And he has a setup with a single primary and the replicas. And he has a sophisticated mechanism in his Epic web stack to do exactly that and deal with the read your own rights problem.
Oh, right on. Oh, we forgot to ask, and you want to talk about this. Prisma is releasing their own hosted Postgres?
That's right.
Yes.
So for a long time, we have wanted databases to be much simpler than they are. The entire serverless movement was about treating your servers, as cattle and not as pets or something like this. Reality is databases are still very finicky. You create one database, it's kind of expensive. You really care about it, you tune it. It's just so complex. We want creating a database to be as easy as creating another page in Notion. That's how databases should be. You should create the database, you shouldn't worry about it, you should be able to have access to the full history so you can roll back if anything happens. It should just work. It shouldn't be expensive. And for a long time, we were waiting for other companies to do this. And it just hasn't really happened. So now we're doing that. We're building a Postgres, a hosted Postgres offering that will have a very generous free tier. You'll be able to create lots and lots of databases for free. And then because of all of the investment we have already done in our other cloud products, Accelerate and Pulse, we're going to build in point-in-time recovery for free for all of these databases. Pulse is a change data capture product that just records and stores all changes that happens in your database. So our backup mechanism is going to be based on that.
You mean you could just like scrub it back like an hour and a half if you wanted?
Yeah. Go back an hour and a half, restore your database to that point, or create a new database and restore it to that point, and then go and have a look at that data.
Oh, and that's different from what most places do right now, where it's, oh, you took 3 backups today, or you want to make another one. You can restore to one of these 3 backups.
But
that's such a common thing, right? You have daily backups or something like this, and then doing the restore is a big deal. Shouldn't be like that. You should just be able to go into your Notion history or your database history and see what has happened in the past.
Wes, we're going to have to switch to Postgres. That's what we're going to have to do and jump on this tool. That's the worst part about doing this podcast. For someone like me, I'm always like, oh, we got to use this now. We got to move off of MySQL.
So we're really excited for this database product, and we're working on it right now. We are working on some really cool low-level technology that enables us to do all of those things. I think a preview version might be available by the time that this podcast launches, but if not, I encourage anyone to just either subscribe to the Prisma Twitter feed, or go and DM me if you want early access to the stuff.
Sweet.
Cool. That's part of the show where we get into sick picks and shameless plugs. Did you come prepared with a sick pick and shameless plug today?
Almost.
Good. That's good. I'll take it. What is your sick pick?
So my sick pick is maybe a little lame, but I'll just encourage everybody to go and try out this AI development stuff. If you haven't already, I know most people probably have. It's all pretty terrible, but it also is super cool, and it's pointing towards a future that I think is extremely exciting. So if you haven't already, go try out Cursor, use Claude to just solve some of your programming issues. What I found again and again and again is I will not use those things, and then I'll try to fix a problem for half an hour and be like, oh, I should just try this AI thing, and it solves the problem immediately. It's such a great experience.
Yeah.
Yeah. In fact, we have a show, episode 834, on using AI tools effectively for this type of thing, because we get a lot of people who hear us talk about these things and instantly are like, poo-poo them. Are people writing code anymore or whatever? But like, yeah, you shouldn't just blindly use this code in your apps, but as an assistant, pretty great. Yeah. Mm-hmm. What about a shameless plug?
So I'll plug 2 things. One is Prisma Optimize. If you're a Prisma user, you should really just take 20 minutes, an hour, play around with Optimize. It's a super simple tool you just enable in Prisma ORM, and then it'll start to collect information about the queries you're running. And at the end of it, it'll look for patterns, for dangerous patterns, things that might be a problem for you in production, and give you recommendations for how to improve your application. Play around with that. I found it a really interesting way to just get a better understanding of what your application is actually doing, and maybe a way to learn about how to make things faster. So that's my plot number 1. Plot number 2, try a database product, Prisma Postgres. I think this is going to be really cool. You'll be able to create as many databases as you want. You're not limited to a single database. And we really are trying to simplify how you work with data. The Prisma ORM is all about querying data in a simpler way, and our hosted Postgres offering is about a much simplified way to manage your databases.
Sick.
Awesome.
It sounds awesome. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for coming on. Appreciate all of your insights into everything. It seems like there's a lot of exciting stuff coming down the horizon with all the local first stuff. The new type SQL stuff is really exciting. So, and of course the hosted stuff. Appreciate all your time, and we'll catch you later.
Thank you, Wes and Scott. It's been great. Great talking to you.
Yeah, no problem.
Welcome.
Thank you.